Hello and welcome back to Gary's Garage, and in this episode we're going to be finishing off the brake and clutch master cylinder reservoirs. If you're watching last time, you'll have seen that as well as getting the engine actually running for the first time in quite a few months, I also started fitting up these master cylinder reservoirs, and I couldn't get any further with the piping because I had run out of the little grommets that I'm using to take the pipe through the bulkhead. I've now got some of them, so let's get these off and start making up some pipes to link these to the master cylinders under here. Okay, so a very tight squeeze, but the brake pipes come through, run along on top of the heater and loop down onto the master cylinders. That was a hell of a job, but it's done now, so that's something else that can be crossed off the list. So what I think we can possibly do now is start bleeding the brakes. So I got myself a bottle of .4 brake fluid, and I'm going to start with this one, which I think is the front brakes, just because it's there, and work my way around, bleeding them all out, try to get all the air out. So front, back, and finally clutch. So let's get on with that. Okay, so that's the brakes done. I got this wrong. That's actually the rear and that's the front. All good. Two loose fittings, one on the back passenger corner, just inside, sort of under where the rear seat goes on the T-piece. I just forgot to nip one of those up, so I had a little puddle there. And the other one was these fittings onto the reservoirs. This middle one was not quite done up tight enough, and it leaked a little bit down my bulkhead and stripped a bit of paint. Brake fluid is horrible stuff for paint. Do not get it on paint. And if you do, neutralise it immediately with just tap water. That will kill the chemicals in it, and you can mop it up and it won't do quite as much damage. But given that this is reasonably fresh primer on bare metal, it's just put a nice little streak down the middle of the bulkhead. So it's not too much of a problem. As I said before, this primer is just temporary, just so that it's protected a little bit. So what I'm going to do next is move on to do the clutch. So I need to bolt that up onto the gearbox and then get some fluid in it and get that bled as well. Okay, so that is the brakes and clutch all plumbed up and working. And the next thing I'm going to move on to is to install this. And this is an old MAP ECU piggyback casing, which I have ripped the innards out of and put to one side. And I have made up myself a little circuit that has the two O2 sensor controllers in it, and also a Arduino style chip. And what that does is it takes the digital output from the O2 sensors, reads it, then converts it onto CAN bus, and will hopefully pump it out over CAN bus into the ECU, which in theory should give me 100% accurate fueling, because sometimes when you use an analog output from the O2 controllers, you can get a slight voltage offset. So the controller thinks it's putting out, for example, 1 volt, but the ECU reads 1.1 volt, and that has a minor impact on the fueling. It is only minor. It's, 0.1, 0.2 of an AFR, but I just want it to be totally accurate. There are plenty of options off the shelf that you can go and buy a fully CAN bus O2 controller. Link do one, as do many other manufacturers, but I already have a couple of O2 controllers that they already have a digital output, and I like to tinker and write code, so I have written some custom code to do it. So I'm going to stick this in by the ECU, hook up the O2 controllers and the CAN bus link, and then once I come to run the car again, hopefully I should get my nice digital lambda sensors. So let's get this mounted up somewhere near the ECU. Okay, so my plan is to put it up just here, just underneath the front edge of the ECU. Means all the cabling is nicely in line. So let's see if that's going to go there. And that is quite close to the throttle pedal. Throttle pedal hits it. But it is only just the very end of it, and I think I might be able to slice that off and give enough clearance to miss this back corner. So I'll whip the pedal out and chop it down on the bench. Okay, so with that trimmed down, that now clears in roughly the position I want it, and it's going to go about there, lined up with the front edge and central. So what I need to do now is just make a little bracket to hold it. So now we just need to plug in the main power and ground, and I'm going to hook up the analog outputs to the ECU as well, just so that I can monitor and make sure that it's all working okay, just in case my CAN bus stuff doesn't work. And then we can route and plug in these cables for the O2 sensors, which come up through the tunnel just down here. So I think that's most of the engine control side of things all sorted. So the engine will run, we can move it with the clutch, and we can stop it with the brakes. But what we haven't got at the moment is a very secure engine. It's just on the mount at the front and the gearbox mount. Now, you may remember many months back that I was thinking about going and getting a new radiator made up. Well, since then I have been watching some YouTube, and the Skid Factory, a couple of guys down in Australia, have done some crazy things with some pretty cool cars, and one of the things that they do is they make custom engine mounts made from some L200 rear leaf spring front eye bushes. And they look pretty cool, and I'm wondering whether I can make myself an engine mount to go off the bottom of each side of the engine, so that I can get rid of the little roll stoppers I've got, and also this big mount at the front. And what that would mean is that this support bar going across the front isn't going to be quite as critical and have to be quite as heavy. So I could possibly remove it, replace it with something a little bit more lightweight, and that might allow me to just tuck the radiator back slightly. So rather than having it vertical, just angle it back slightly towards the engine, and that might just give me enough extra room to keep the radiator I've got, which I know will definitely cool this engine and it won't overheat. It's beautiful on a run. It's been good enough for the drag strip as well. Track, I'm not too sure, but it's a good big radiator and should keep this engine cool. So I don't really want to go too much smaller on the radiator in case I then introduce overheating. So I think what I'm going to do is support the bottom of the engine in just the right place to hold it, and then I'm going to take this front mount off and then get the radiator in and just see whether I've got enough space without this mount and without this cross brace to get my current radiator up in the hole. If I can, then really good. I can just remake the brace across the front to tie in these edges of the wings. It doesn't have to be as strong, and that will save me a little bit of money because I won't have to buy a new radiator, and also I can hopefully then sort it all out and all will be peachy. So I will get under here, get that engine supported, and let's see what we can do. Right, that's the engine now supported on the cross member and the 2 roll stoppers, and I've also got the jack under there just to support the weight as well. So what I'm hoping I can do now is remove this front panel, remove this front cross member here, and see whether we can get the radiator in. Okay, so it's off. I think the jack's doing most of the work at the moment, but that does open that up quite nicely. So I think what I'm going to do is pull these, or move these radiator hoses out of the way, and let's see how the radiator looks. I wonder if that will actually go there. The only thing I've got to worry about though is that bottom hose. I don't know how close to here I am. I think I'm going to need the flip front back in and see whether I can lift this up from the bottom with the flip front in place. Right, that's the flip front in and on its hinges. So let's see if we can lift this radiator up into place and see how much space we've got. Oh yes. I think there's definitely going to be room there. I might have to move the outlet, but that's not looking bad. But I think I'm going to have to put the alternator in first, because that obviously has a belt off it. Yeah, let's get the alternator in first, because I don't want to think that I can fit it and then find that the alternator doesn't fit, because that would be pretty bad. Okay, so the alternator goes in through this hole here, but it's not quite big enough to get it through without keep bending this lip here up and down every time. So what I'm going to do is trim this off now with the grinder, and then I'll remake a panel to go over here at a later date that covers this bit and adds the strength back in. This alternator should slide in there quite nicely now. Right, that's the alternator in, so let's put the front down and try again to get the radiator in place. Yep, that fan would be quite close to the alternator pulley, but I think that I could reposition the fan slightly and get myself a bit more clearance. Now how we're looking for height at the top. Yeah, it's definitely getting caught up on the fan. So what if I take the fan off? Okay, let's take the fans off, and then let's work with just the radiator so I can figure out the fans at a later date. Yeah, there's quite a lot of space there. There is quite a lot of space up there. I might need to move the lower hose outlet though, because that might just get in the way of this suspension bracket. But there is quite a lot of space there if I angle that backwards. And yeah, with that without that engine mount there's loads of space, and I can get a support, even get a support bar across the top there to tie the tops together. And that will become the top radiator support as well. Yep, that's going to look pretty good. Okay, so I've wiggled the radiator up into place, and there is quite a bit of movement on the top of the radiator here before it hits the inside of the panel. So I've got a little bit of wriggle room here to get it secured up. I will need to mess a little bit with the inlet and the outlet. The inlet at the top could probably do with coming over towards the passenger side a bit, and it will need to come off at a 90-degree angle to point down in the right direction. There's not going to be enough room to get the 90-degree bend on the hose, and the bottom hose, that outlet at the moment will go straight into the mounting bracket for the front suspension, so that needs to move over as well. Neither of which are insurmountable, but I will need to get hold of some 32mm aluminium pipe so that I can chop off what I've got here and weld on new. But I can carry on and get the mounting sorted. So if I am going to get rid of this front engine mount, which is looking like I will, so I can reuse this nice big radiator, then I don't need anything quite as heavy duty across the front. So I think a piece of just right angled steel and a couple of brackets on the end to pick up on these mounting points that I had before, and that should do the job of tying the front end together at the top, and they can also be my radiator support brackets. Right, so that is the radiator support and top chassis crossbar all in, and that feels pretty secure, and the radiator will sit on near that, so that gives me a good positioning for the top of the radiator. And what I need to do now is figure out the bottom of the radiator, but the main thing there is going to be the suspension pickups, so that is going to be the first thing I need to sort out. So I think what I'll do is I will bolt up the original lower cross member. That will allow me to align the suspension just where it needs to go, and then I can take that off and make up a new bracket to suit. Right, so I've made up a bar which should hopefully go across the front. These little tabs here will pick up on the original lower bolt. That might get in the way of the drain plug on the radiator, so I might have to move that as well. And these bits can go back and slide inside the chassis, and there's another bolt hole on the brackets for the suspension that could go through there and through the chassis, and that would give me yet another good mounting point. So let's see whether this fits up in the hole, and if it does, then I can start drilling some holes in this and adding riv nuts or captive nuts, whatever I need to make it fit. Oh yes, that's a little slide in now. Good old spot of paint trick. So I've managed to get some captive nuts in here, just about. That was a bit of a battle. So should be able to now get this up in and get the suspension bolted to it. Oh, so there we go. That is the lower chassis brace and suspension mount done. once I pop the bonnet in a second, I will show you what I've done and how it looks inside. But that now is the top and bottom tied in together, and I can start thinking about mounting the radiator. Yes. Oh, and mounting the engine. That's a whole other thing. Okay, so that's the top and bottom supports now in. So let me show you what they're like. And so top one here is curved to match the profile of the bonnet. The bottom one there is in, and that gives plenty of space for the radiator to come up and sit nicely at a bit of an angle like it should. So the next thing I can look at is the original aim, which is to change the engine mounts. Okay, so I can move on now to making the engine mounts, and to do that I will need this selection of stuff I've got in front of me. So we've got some nice thick steel sheet, and that will make up the bit that bolts to the engine. We have some steel tube. This is 32mm internal diameter, I believe, and this will make up the bit that comes off of this plate, and will also hold the bushes. And these are, as I've mentioned before, Mitsubishi L200 1987 model rear spring front eye bush. And these come as a 2-part polyurethane bush with a steel tube as an inner. And when they're all put together like that, that will go into a piece of tube, and then the whole lot will drop inside this piece of box section, which is 100mm outer diameter, 90mm internal diameter, so 5mm wall, and make that into a couple of little U's, and there is a bracket. So I need to make 2 of those, one for each side of the engine, and this plate will need to have some holes drilled in it to secure it to the side of the block. So I need to get out some cardboard for some CAD templating and get cutting and fabricating to make it fit the hold. So that's the basics of the bracket that goes on the body, the bush that sits inside it, and the tube that will go round the bush. Done. I still need to trim this down to length and get it nice and straight. And I also need to convert this big sheet of steel here into a bracket that will bolt onto the engine, and use the remainder of the tube to link the two up in whatever position and orientation is required. But unfortunately I have run out of time for this episode, and I need to get hold of a couple of supplies. I need some bolts of the right size and thread pitch to go into the engine block, and I also need the right length bolt to go through these bushes, which I don't have on the shelf. So while I go away and order those, edit this video and get it up to you, I will then see you next time on Garry's Garage, when we'll continue making up these new engine mounts. So thanks very much for watching. See you next time. Bye.